athleticism is something that Jaylen Withers has in spades. I think obviously there was some settling in that took place last year with North Carolina, and you trying to find where his role was, kind of compared to what it was in Louisville. I think he probably at times tried to figure out where does he fit in with Armando Bacot. Uh, as we go into this coming season, what do you see the ceiling being for a guy like Jaylen Withers, and how is he going to provide chemistry and stability for a team that is going to have to lean on some vets somewhere?
The ceiling, I think, is he earns it in practice and becomes the team starting four. I think that's the ceiling. I think what's more likely is that he continues to improve his efficiency, which, let me say this: Jaylen Withers is not a bad player. I think because of the last thing we all saw of him, everybody assumes that he's a bad player. By no means is he an All-American, but he's not a bad player either. I think he last year was really, actually, really, really efficient for UNC, especially towards the end of the year. He really came on, I would say, maybe mid-February, I guess,
Yeah.
and played just really smart, for the most part, solid basketball, which
Well,
is,
and I think the thing in February is people knew the staff knew what they were getting from him, which was the
right,
biggest thing he could have done is be stable in his contributions. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
right, and we always talk about role definition, and that takes time, especially for someone coming from a different program. No offense to the current Louisville program, but the Louisville program he was a part of, it took a while to really get that off of him. So to speak, some of those bad habits, some of those lazy habits, and he did it towards the end of the year. So, what I see for him is a player that can give you 15 really strong minutes. I think once you start getting above that, there are some tendencies that he has that maybe he can weed out that can make him not as an effective as a player. Without hitting really any three, I think he hit 4 threes all of last season. Without being a threat from three, he became a really good rebounder for UNC. Percentage wise, I believe he's their second best. A really good offensive rebounder for UNC. Surprisingly, I guess, I don't know why, but a really good free throw shooter for UNC. Blocked a lot of shots. So a really strong utility athlete. And that is something that UNC is going to need, especially when you have players like Cadeau and Davis who can break down defenses. You need someone who can finish some of that. So between Withers and Powell and Jackson, they have three, I would say, pretty quality, or we expect to be three quality finishers. For Withers, I think that is the ceiling is, yeah, starting four. I think the floor for him is kind of what his role was last year, which is reserve energy guy off the bench who's going to rebound, defend, and kind of clean up and finish in transition. I think for him, he just has to realize that um, handling the ball and kind of putting the ball on the floor are not his strong suits. I think not every time that happened, it was a negative for UNC. But I think the more he doesn't do that and plays to his strengths, the better it'll be for UNC.
Sean, we have talked ad nauseum already about North Carolina's need to fill the role that Armando Bacot had on the glass. And we've kind of hypothesized that there will be different folks that contribute to getting those rebounds. The rebounds may come from different places on the floor. But I think this is probably the place that Jaylen Withers stands to make the biggest leap in his ownership of a place on the roster. I think the thing that I'm curious about, and this is where I'd love to hear your thoughts and how you think this might play out, is with Elliot Cadeau's development, assuming that his shot has improved the way that we think that it is, having a guy like that and having more athleticism on the floor in general, do you think that his offensive production, his being Jaylen Withers, do you think his offensive point production can go up just by being a guy that's around the rim or just by being a guy that's able to slash or get free around the bucket with his athleticism? Do you think that his offensive production can go up kind of by default of the growth of some other players on the team?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it as just from a points per game perspective, and you saw 2 points or 4 points, and you say, "Hey, he played pretty well in some of those later games." So I think from a strength perspective, when he's cutting off ball, when he's making himself available, what we were seeing with him inside of the paint was, to Shrill's point, he had figured out what was needed of him, and he was doing that very well. I think maybe some of the concern is, hey, you're staying around another year, you're seeing a lot of departure. Maybe you want to get back to some of that role you had in Louisville. But I think the more that he can stay in terms of what he was doing last year and just doing it even more of it. I think to your point, that could see him get another, easy cut to the basket, or at the same time, offensive rebounding is going to be, in my opinion, a huge struggle, just given the loss of Armando. And that's a role, playing against Duke and in one of the last regular season games, he had 4 offensive rebounds. So I think he is the guy that can slash and cut. Uh, you know, I, when you looked at him coming from Louisville and you saw his form from 3, obviously you're not saying a pure shooter, but I think anybody had to be surprised by what he did do at Louisville, especially from the corners and from the wing at times, to what transpired from 3, 4 for 20 throughout the season. So I do think over the offseason, I don't think you're going to expect to see a volume shooter or that 45% shooter from Louisville. But once again, if you can have defenders not just completely playing off of him or daring to shoot, I think that will open it up for everybody else and will open it up for him a little bit more. But if he can focus on cutting hard to the basket, offensive rebounding, and just being that utility guy, I think there's a lot of playing time, especially since he was getting in that 11 to 14 minutes per game towards the end when everything really counted last year.
Yeah, and I was just looking at the stats, like his last 7 games in double figures for all of them. Rebound totals were 8, 7, 4, 6, 10, 4, 4. And again, that's in very limited minutes. The most he played was against
You
Wagner.
take that, and you take
Yeah,
all of that and run.
right, exactly. So it's just a matter for him of the UNC staff really saying, "This is your role. This is what we need from you. Can you go do this thing?" And aside from that, too, I would say also on the defensive end, he's a really good weak side defender as well, especially with shot blocking, and that's something that Armando Bacot became really good at. So it's up to him and Jalen Washington and Van Allen Lubin to replace some of that. But I think he can be a really solid piece for UNC, either as a starter at the 4. I don't think that's far fetched, or in a kind of similar role as a reserve that he had last year.